Omuonge wolombude.
Amabaqhwasa.
Our first session, as mentioned, will tackle emerging trends in journalism and journalism education, and both should be user-centered in order to meet the demands. The session includes a training needs assessment, and we will all witness the virtual launch of a toolkit. I directly hand over to Peter Deselaers, country representative Namibia for Deutsche Welle Academy, who will facilitate the session. Peter has been a journalist, trainer, facilitator and consultant with Deutsche Welle for years, let's say years, having worked in different parts of the world, including Latin America. Peter knows a thing or two about journalism and training needs. He will be joined by Zoé Titus, director of the Namibia Media Trust and co-organizer of this year's conference, and Professor Maya Mare, senior lecturer in the Department of Communications at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Peter, I hand over the virtual microphone to you.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'll jump right into this session, which will try to share a little bit of the experience that we had here in Namibia, trying to find a way how to design trainings based on the actual needs of the journalists, of the media houses, of the media users, and trying to find a way how can we actually analyze these needs and then put that into a strategy for the training center, the NXT Journalism Hub. And that's also our first speaker up there, Zoé Titus, the director of the NMT, and she's sitting right in front of the newly designed logo and key visual for the NXT, the Next Journalism Hub, which is the training center of the Namibia Media Trust. And I'm also happy that Maya Mare is with us to shed a little bit more of critical analysis onto the findings and to discuss with us how what we're seeing in the media landscape connects to the training needs and to the bigger picture. And Maya is pretty much busy in anything concerning media. He's an associate professor and the deputy head of the Department of Communication here at the Namibia University of Science and Technology, in Namibia better known as NUST. And his research actually dives deep all the time into social media and to the intersection between technology and society. I've read a couple of his papers on fake news and on the interventions that we've seen also in the elections in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. And so we're really happy that he is here with us today. But we'll start with a short video that I will share now that shows what the NMT is actually doing in a bigger picture and with the training up.
Today, we say to all our Namibian colleagues, to all our colleagues across the world, continue to speak truth to power. Be bold in your effort to uncover wrongdoing. When they come for you, remember you are not alone. We stand with you.
Hello, Africa. My name is Zoé Titus. I'm the director of the Namibia Media Trust, in short, the NMT, which operates from the capital Windhoek in Namibia. The NMT is a leading African institution that defends and promotes everyone's right to freedom of expression and information. We are committed to engaging people in claiming the right, challenging those who violate the right, and we work to foster a broader and deeper understanding of the right and its value in our society. As an institution, we do this by seizing opportunities and partnerships where we can have the most collective and measurable impact. We convene creative and innovative platforms for debating and taking action on freedom of expression issues within broader society. And we strengthen the capacity of the media to deepen its role as a source of reliable information a spotlight on abuse and injustice, a driver of growth, and a platform for citizen voices. And these are the values that inform our projects, ranging from our bespoke Free Speak podcast on all things media, our Ask the Expert sessions that bring together journalists and experts on a range of issues that impact on the livelihoods of citizens, our training centre, the NXT Journalism Hub, which is that safe, creative, innovative space where we learn along with our trainees through innovation, skills development and strategy how to take journalism education to the next level. And don't dare forget our one-of-a-kind youth quake, where young people pick up the skills in the most creative ways possible to ensure that they have the credentials to guarantee themselves a seat at the table.
So I hope that gave you a good glimpse into what the NMT does, and you can also find the video on YouTube if the transmission wasn't all good. I put it into the WhatsApp group. And that brings me straight to the main character of this video, Zoé Titus. Good morning.
So good morning, everyone. And thank you for that introduction, Peter. Shall I move along or...
Yeah, we are all very keen to hear what you're telling us, how that exercise went.
Okay.
So you did a needs assessment, and you're now going to tell us what the needs assessment meant for the NXT Journalism Hub.
Okay, I'm going to do that, and please allow me to share my screen. I hope this is going to work. So I think you can see that. Okay, again, good morning, everyone. I have a short PowerPoint presentation. I think that the video dealt with the initial introduction to the NMT, but in short, again, the NMT's objectives are to promote media freedom, freedom of expression, and access to information, and we do that through partnerships, convening creative platforms and creative and innovative platforms, and the focus then of today's discussion and what we've been doing over the last 3 days is our focus on strengthening the capacity of the media. The NXT Journalism Hub. The NMT has been doing training since 2013, but on a very ad hoc basis. So it's around 20...
Quickly, can you take the microphone a little bit away from your mouth? Then we can probably hear you better. There's a lot of wind going through the microphone.
Okay, is that better now?
Yes, a lot better. Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. So as I was saying, we've been doing training on a very ad hoc basis since 2013, largely for staff of the Namibian on a needs basis, based on requests. But I mean, we have acknowledged the need for more consistent training, and definitely on our part, a more focused approach to our training. So from 2018 onwards, we have been speaking with potential partners about ways and means to consolidate our training offering. So our training then is founded on 3 pillars, and that's what the NXT Journalism Hub is all about. It's about new ideas, innovation, the exchange of ideas, and needs-based training. Peter mentioned the training needs assessment. Well, we do everything from an evidence-based perspective. So what we attempted to do was the first step to do a training needs assessment to, well, in order to make an assessment of the training needs of Namibian journalists, but also to develop the methodology in such a way that it can be potentially replicated anywhere in the region, globally, whatever. I mean, the tools are there, and that is what we are very excited to share with you a little later. The study objectives. We wanted to look at the level of involvement of journalists in existing training opportunities, and then through that assess the needs of journalists in respect of training from within different levels of um, in different levels of professionalism, numbers of years of experience, etc. Then also assessing those training needs depending on the type of media in which they work, to assess the satisfaction with current training, and then based on that, set for ourselves or make an analysis of the most pertinent training priorities, and hopefully through our then bespoke portfolio going forward to respond to those training priorities. What we've done, we appointed two very well-known and reputable researchers, Krista Kelder from Survey Warehouse, who also, by the way, is involved in the Afrobarometer research that I think most people are familiar with, and Professor Herman Wasserman, who did our keynote address at the start of this conference. And they, together as a team, undertook the study for us. So I'm sharing with you this information in broad strokes because this training needs assessment has not been officially launched. And I don't want to preempt that launch, which will take place towards the end of January. But what we can do is to share with you the methodology, the tools that we used, so that hopefully you can replicate it elsewhere. In terms of the methodology, we undertook an online survey. 266 invitations were sent out, and there was a 30% response rate. I think it's important to understand that, Namibia is a huge country, very small population, about just under 2.5 million. So it's a small media sector. So when I make reference to 266 invitations, that's quite a large number for our already quite small media sector. Then there were focus group discussions, 3 focus group discussions, including media students, media managers, and media users and consumers. The most important thing that you probably would be interested in would be the findings. It emphasized need for core journalistic skills and emphasis in training on the core journalistic skills. Formal journalism training, there was consensus between managers and even student participants that formal journalism training was not adequate to the demands for the contemporary digitized workspace. Interestingly, though, the responses did not suggest a strong need for specialized training in journalism. The issue of the sustainability of the media is critical. I think it's come up on many occasions, and that too was raised in the study. The need to find alternative sources of revenue for the operations of media houses, and the subsequent sustainability also of the training programs that will support the viability of media in general. And then managerial skills, I think I put that on one of the Jamboards earlier in the conference, emphasizing the need for transition and training of journalists to make that transition from being in the newsroom or doing the basic journalistic work to moving into managerial roles. And then the need for experimenting with training formats. Some would say that would require extensive resources, but I think through creative thinking, we can consider the training formats. For example, even in classes, e-learning. These are, some of the issues that came up. And then internships for media students as a means of practical training. So this is, a snapshot from the research study to emphasize again what I said right at the beginning, a need to return to the basics. So this was foregrounded news gathering and reporting, research, pitching, story ideas, interviewing, investigative journalism. So if you go through this list and see the percentages attached to it, these are the responses. And it gives you a very clear idea of, again, that need to return to the basics. And here, again, the emphasis. So what we have then started doing at the NMT is to look at our very focused but limited portfolio, which will be informed by this needs assessment. We are looking at a module in the basics of journalism, basics of investigative journalism, social media verification, etc. But importantly, I think it needs to be noted that we are not attempting to reinvent the wheel. We strongly believe in partnerships with existing organizations. We, for example, acknowledge that Namibia Fact Check as better qualified to do social media verification training. So that's why we partner with them. We are aware that the Amamungani Investigative Journalism Center, with whom we've got a long-standing relationship, have the skills and the credentials for training in investigative journalism. So we would partner with them along with MISA Malawi, who has an existing module on the basics of investigative journalism. Another important takeaway is that whilst we've done this needs assessment, we think that there's still the potential to improve the scope and value of the research output. Imagine how valuable this training needs assessment would be that has just focused on the needs of journalists, the very specific needs in the media houses. What if we were to combine that training needs assessment with, example, the training that MISA Zambia has done on trust in the media? If we were to combine these two training offerings or research offerings, we would have a much more comprehensive understanding, not only of the media training needs, but also the needs of the consumers and the audiences that the media is set to serve. A little later, we will speak about the toolkit, which is a guide on how to conduct the focus group discussions and an online survey with all the resources that would be required to undertake that assessment. That is it in a nutshell.
That is for the wrap of this session. And that brings me to Admire. Admire, you've been part of this needs assessment as well, but I have a question first, because you work for the university, you know? So your basic job is to teach young journalists as a university lecturer. So do you feel you're kind of on the other side of journalism education with the universities and Zoe is on the training side, or is there, how do you feel about that? Is that the competition? Is Zoe a competition, or is she a compliment?
It depends on what you want to do, whether you want to look at the glass as half empty or half full. But certainly, I think for us, we look at it as complementers rather than competitors, because certainly the ecosystem that we are dealing with is very huge. We cannot do everything. We cannot be able to do everything for the industry, but also even for the region. So certainly, there is a need for complementarity there. And obviously for us, we are into training and education, because formerly we were a polytechnic. So our approach to training certainly allows us to make sure that we deal with the practice side of it, but also the theory side of it. So we try by all means to merge and to mix the two so that we can actually come up with a well-rounded graduate. That's our mission.
Okay, so that's why you also were invited when the NMT had the strategy session where they discussed with a variety of stakeholders what the needs assessment actually found out. So we're really happy that you're here today to give us your take on what the needs assessment tells us in terms of trends. And yeah, let me quickly share your screen. I hope that is the right one. No, not share the sound. Share. Okay, so you should now all be able to see Admaya's presentation. Can I get a quick thumbs up from someone if that's true or not?
Yep, good to see.
Okay, perfect. Then, Admaya, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank the Namibia Media Trust and other partners that have made this particular conference a success. Certainly from our side is the Namibia University of Science and Technology. We are honored to be part of this conversation because as I've already pointed out, we realize that certainly we cannot do everything. We can do something, of course, to help train and educate our journalists, but obviously we also need other partners that come in and plug the holes that probably may remain, obviously, especially that we are dealing with a fast-paced changing media ecosystem that is always changing. The skills are always changing, the technology is changing. And because of that, certainly we realize that we certainly need other partners to come on board and complement what we are doing, where we feel that we can actually collaborate and do similar projects and trainings together. We certainly feel that it's the right way to do it. So can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So I think in terms of the agenda, in terms of what I want to look at, pretty much I want to look at briefly what is entailed in terms of needs assessment, generally in journalism, training and education. I'll try and do a mini stakeholder analysis, and then look briefly again at the newsroom of the past, which probably somebody can actually call the old normal, if ever we want to use that phrase. And then also look at briefly again the drivers of change in terms of training needs assessment, and then what we as educators often call 21st century graduate attributes. And these graduate attributes often most of the times when we are doing curriculum development, they are very important in terms of helping us to look through and actually to think through what needs to be done to make sure that we can come up with a graduate that can actually be able to work in an environment which is constantly changing. Then I'll also look at what I'll probably call journalism or education or training for the future. I'll also look at newsrooms of today and the future. And then obviously, based on the findings that have come out of this particular study that is going to be launched, I also look at some of the essential skills for the new normal in terms of what really needs to be emphasized, what needs to be focused on, so that we can actually come up with graduates that can actually be able to add value to these newsrooms that we are seeing nowadays. And then finally, in terms of conclusion, I'll try to look forward and imagine new futures of journalism, education, and training here in Africa, but also pretty much globally. I think you can move on to the next slide, Peter. Thanks so much. So I think I want to start by just raising a few issues to say that whenever we are talking about needs assessment in terms of journalism, training, and education, it's very important for us to realize that this process is always cyclical. For us, especially in the university setup, we see it as a cyclical process because it never ends. It's a process that starts, but it never ends, because in as much as you do your needs assessment probably before doing a curriculum development, somehow during the process of actually teaching, you constantly also need to constantly ask yourself, are you still teaching the relevant and right content for that particular generation or that particular cohort that you have at that point in time? So it's always very important to look at needs assessment from a cyclical process. It's a cyclical process that has got so many layers to it. Obviously, you initiate the process, you go out and collect the data, you try to analyze it, you then implement the findings. But after implementing the findings, it doesn't mean that you end. You have to constantly monitor the process to make sure that whatever you are doing, whatever you are putting in terms of course content, whether it still makes sense to the current situation that you are dealing with. So for us as educators, we see it as a pretty much a cyclical process, and it's very important to look at as that. And also the other thing that is also very important for us is that we often look at it from a position where we say needs assessment are always in a constant state of becoming. They never get to a final destination where you can actually say, now we know the skills that are needed for this particular code, or now we have got the right kind of skills or the right kind of recipe for us to be able to train these journalists. We will not be able to get to that. So it's always a state of becoming. We are always constantly evolving. We are constantly doing our needs and assessment. We are constantly visiting our students who are on attachment to get to understand what is it that they are learning there, what is it that they are doing that we are not teaching, so that we can be able to plug the holes that are coming from there. So it's also very important to look at it as something that is always in a state of what we would probably call a constant state of becoming, and there is no final destination because things are constantly changing. But also, journalism as a profession itself, I think one thing that has come very clearly to us is that it's always a dynamic profession. It's always changing. It's always adapting to new technologies. It's always adapting to new circumstances, historical circumstances. And we have seen that quite a lot, especially now with the advent of, the resurgence actually of fake news, disinformation, whatever you want to call it. We have seen that journalism always find ways of trying to reinvent itself, to reimagine itself in those kinds of setup. And it's very important for us, even as educators, that we think and look at these things and say, if it is in a constant of, if it is a dynamic profession, what is it that we need to do so that we can actually have skills or training needs that can actually speak to these changes or this dynamic process that we are dealing with? And the other thing that I also want to flag is that journalism, in terms of needs assessment, is always constantly responding to, or is always constantly being disrupted by technology and social change. And that is what we have seen, especially now with issues around the need for data journalism, the need to teach our students social media management and moderation skills, or the need to make sure that we capacitate our students to know the back end of social media companies, to understand what our metrics are, what is analytics, and what you need to know in terms of understanding how the algorithms behind the website actually behave and how do they behave. Those things are, it demonstrates to us that we need to also respond to and also make sure that when we are disrupted by these technologies, we also need to disrupt ourselves in terms of how we teach and how we train our students. Otherwise, if we don't do that, chances are that we may be teaching students that may not be fit for purpose, and students that may not be able to speak to the environment that we want to address. That's what's very important. And then the other thing that I also want to speak to is that therefore, because of that, needs assessment have to be very flexible. Then we need to keep an ear and also an eye on the ground to understand what is it that is happening in the ecosystem. What is it that is happening in the ecosystem? What can we do as journalism educators and trainers so that we can be able to speak to these changes? And it's very important for us that we actually use what we call a dipstick approach in terms of needs assessment, so that we can know what is happening, what is coming, what is about to happen, and so that we can then be able to deal with the circumstances at home. So thanks so much for coming to this slide, which I wanted to speak to. So now I just want to flag some of our own challenges as a university, and here pretty much I want to speak from our own challenges that we have seen in terms of doing these needs of assessment, and what you can also learn. For us as universities, generally, one thing that has also come to the fore is that we have realized that the requirements that actually come from government, or the bodies that actually govern the way how we operate, for example, your NSG, which is pretty much your Namibia Council of Higher Education, they require us to do curriculum review after 5 years. And I think 5 years is a long time, especially with the way technology is shifting and changing. And that creates a situation where between 5 years, what do you do when things change? How do you evolve? How do you change your curriculum? How do you change your circumstances so that you can speak to that kind of? And I think it's not only here in Namibia, but I know it's a regional issue. There are so many universities that are caught up in that time lag, or that kind of a waiting period situation where you have to wait. And sometimes when you wait, things are happening, and students are coming. You are enrolling students as you go, so you can't stop the process of actually continuing to train. But so what do you need to do? But of course, to cater for that, universities have said that a lecturer at an individual level, you've got at least 20% that you are allowed to make in terms of changes to the course outline. So when you feel like that there's something that has happened in your course or in your field, and you want to change that 20, you want to add that 20%, you are allowed, but you can't change the other 80%. You can't change. that one you can only wait until there's almost like 5 years. So that also makes it very difficult for us to maneuver. And that's why sometimes people criticize universities for being very slow to adapt to changes, because the processes also around the mechanisms of doing needs assessment are also very, very bureaucratic, but also very, very, very slow to adapt to these changes, which makes it very difficult for us. And then again, the other thing that we have also realized from our own perspective is that we have got what we call a program advisory committee, where we have got people from stakeholders from different, different industries, be it your editors, be it your journalists, be it your people from media advocacy organizations, be it people from outside the university, journalism educators in other countries. They are supposed to constitute what we call a program advisory committee. And these are made up of volunteers. There's no pay, there's no incentive. And sometimes when we want to constitute these meetings, we have realized that we have challenges to actually constitute a quorum, because again, it's volunteer based. It becomes very difficult for you to incentivize people to participate. People can just say, I'm busy, or there's something that they're doing, so they can't come. And therefore, you have to make decisions based on people that probably that have turned up. What if people that have turned up are all probably students? Or people that have turned up are only from media advocates? What kind of a curriculum are you going to be able to, what kind of needs assessment are you going to actually be able to do through that kind of meeting? It becomes very difficult and also complicated on our part to do that. But again, it's a requirement that we should do that. And then the last thing that I just want to flag before I move on, because I know that time is not on my side, is that I also want to flag the issue of so what we call structural problems associated with peer reviews. So sometimes you send out these programs or reviewed programs to say, we send it to our colleagues or to our people that are in other countries and say, okay, can you do an evaluation whether this program is fit for purpose? Can we actually go ahead and introduce or implement this particular course? Sometimes we get what we probably call an unmitigated praise, where you are just being praised to say, this is a fantastic program, this is a very good program, you go ahead and implement it and all that kind of thing. So that kind of unmitigated praise sometimes creates a situation where you think that you are doing the right thing, yet probably in terms of speaking to the issues that are on the ground, probably we are not doing it the right way. And that creates also a serious problem. And also again, issues around chief battles, obviously, because remember, some of these people that we are sending to, especially in the region, they are also, people that are also offering similar programs. So obviously, if they feel that you are introducing something probably new and novel, and that probably can actually, disrupt the market, actually allow more students to come to your program, then it can also create. So there are situations where probably somebody can just have this negative a review of a program just because they want to delay its implementation so that they can also implement it. That is also part and parcel of university structures that we've also seen, which makes it very difficult sometimes. I think you can move on, Peter. I want to try and move fast. I think here I won't talk much. These are some of the key stakeholders.
Admire, just one thing. Don't try to talk faster, because I think then it will be difficult for the normal listeners to follow your thoughts. Right? But it's good to get a little bit ahead of the time, and to really look at how the newsroom of today and for the digital connects to the training needs assessment, and to really look at, okay, how can we focus on the skills for the next generation of journalists?
Certainly. So that's why I said, let me just try and jump this slide, because I think I can always speak to it. I think I wanted to just flag some of the key stakeholders that have always been at the center of this needs assessment, and what contributions they have brought to the fore in terms of, you can move on to the newsroom of the past. So here I think I'm using this particular image on purpose, just to highlight some of the issues that were happening then. Of course, the typewriter, some of us, when we trained in a polytechnic setup, this is pretty much the kinds of typewriters that we're using, obviously, to learn the ropes in terms of understanding how you can actually be part and parcel of the journalism. And we remember during those days, we would do shorthand, T-line, and all that kind of thing, so that you can be able to understand and practice journalism. But essentially, this was the newsroom of the past. Yes, it was again driven by technology. As we are seeing, technology was still part and parcel of our journalism, but essentially things have changed. If we look at what is happening now in 2020 and what was happening 20, 30 years ago, certainly there are so many changes that have happened. And these changes necessitate that we need to train our journalists to be able to to operate in an environment where they can actually speak to issues of concern now. And now I think you can move backwards, just backwards one. Yeah, that one. Thanks. So yeah, that one. Thanks. So here I've actually said that if you want to look at the newsroom of the past, it had its own traditional menu of journalistic skills that were required. It has got its own, its own menu where these skills were very important, and some of them are still very important, by the way, until today. But some of them certainly are no longer necessary, or some of them are no longer that very, very important or essential if we want to look at what has happened over the last few years. And here I've just listed, these are not, the list is not exhaustive, but I've just picked the ones that I think speaks to what I want to speak about today, which is, for example, you have investigative reporting. It has always been there, and even up to now, we are increasingly seeing the need to continuously do that, especially now with fake news, disinformation, and all these things. We have realized that there's an urgent need actually to capacitate students to actually dig deep and to be able to look at facts, that are behind some of our stories. And also, writing skills are still essentially very important nowadays, but even much more important probably now. Media management, it was a traditional kind of a journalistic skill then. Print design and production for us, again, still remains one of the main. But again, if you look at print design, we are also seeing the advent of a newspaper that is in digital format. And again, so the print, in some instances, some are actually saying the print is going to die soon, but obviously in Africa, it's going to be a bit longer because obviously we are still way behind in terms of catching up with certain kinds of technologies. So certainly I think the print will still be here for a long time to come. But again, there are shifts in terms of this kind of a skill. Radio production and editing, television production and editing skills, again, there are also, these skills are still very much important, but again, we are seeing a converged kind of a media platform where TV is no longer just confined to maybe a national broadcasting corporation, but now you can do Facebook broadcasting, for example. You can do different kinds of broadcasting, and all that creates different kinds of skills that are also required in our students so that they can actually be able to operate in a changing environment. Audiovisual production, again, very, very much important, closely related to digital, digital revolution that is. So now I just want to talk about the drivers of these changes. And then when I talk about these drivers of changes, of training needs assessment, I would want then to link it to what is it that is required of us now going forward, because it's very important for us to then see why is it that we need to constantly do this needs assessment, and what is emerging out of this needs assessment, and what should we focus on in terms of training and also in education. And I think I've spoken to some of these issues, for example, the technological disruptions and shifts. And I think it's very important for me right now to just emphasize that we have seen changes, especially at the level of production, at the level of distribution, consumption, and even the business model of journalism is significantly changed over time. And I think our training must speak to these things, because if it doesn't speak to these things, chances are that we are training journalists that are not going to be able to fit into the newsroom that is there right now. Chances are that people are going to be trained, and when they go to the newsroom, they are going to realize that the newsroom is no longer as it was imagined or it was spoken about in class. So it's also very important that we realize that the production, the distribution, and even the consumption, people are no longer just relying on your hard copy newspaper. People are no longer listening religiously to radio stations. Some are preferring podcasts, some are preferring digital first kind of media products, and that also creates a situation where we need to adapt. And then, of course, I think this issue of social and political change was discussed very eloquently by Prof. Wasserman last time when he spoke. And I think what is also becoming clear to us is that there's a rise of populism, disinformation, and the need to verify and critical thinking skills becomes very important. And that makes it very important for us not to just focus on training so that people get craft competent skills, but also they must also have critical thinking skills. And I think that's very important. While we need to focus on craft competencies, we should not neglect critical thinking skills, because if we do that, we have a situation where journalists are going to be faced with a world full of disinformation, a world full of populism, propaganda, how are they going to be able to fit into that kind of an environment? And that's very important for us. And then, of course, I've already pointed out the issues around concerns around the need, around the future of work. And I think that comes with the issue around the fourth industrial revolution and the need to have what we call 21st century graduate attributes that are very important. And when you talk about 21st century graduate attributes, we're pretty much talking about the need to train journalists in problem-solving skills, creativity, collaborative working skills, teamwork, and also they should be able to be critical thinkers. And I think that is also very important in terms of what we need to focus on going forward. You can move on, I think, so that...
Yeah, can we, please go into that slide, because I think that is what really is interesting about your presentation. So what is the 21st century skill set for journalists?
Certainly, thank you so much. So I think I think you can see from here that when we talk about what we call the 21st century skills, we have got 3 layers. There are 3 layers that we talk about. The first one are what we call foundational literacies. Then we talk about what we call competencies. And then ultimately out of that, we talk about what we call character qualities that should come out. And in terms of, I think, foundational literacies in terms of journalists, and I think that's very important. Literacy skills become very important, especially data mining, data visualization, and the ability of journalists to actually be able to crunch numbers. And I think that's very important nowadays. It's very important that journalists must be able to crunch numbers. They should be able to calculate. They should be able to do, deal with large data sets and deal with big data so that they can actually be able to, do large-scale investigative projects that can actually change our circumstances.
That concept here is generally for students, or is it meant particularly for journalism learners?
Journalism learners.
Journalism learners, okay.
Yes. And then the other issue... Yeah. Okay, go ahead, just go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, how do you think that relates to what we've seen in the needs assessment?
I think that's what has also come out of the needs assessment that is going to be launched today is that I think there was need for, I think, financial journalism, and also I think business journalism. I think it was emphasized that we need to train journalists in that kind of regard. So it's very important.
And what is called beat reporting sometimes. No? How do I cover economics? How do I cover politics, social issues, etc.? No?
Certainly. Thanks for that. So again, I think because of time, let me just flag some issues. Of course, numeracy is also very important. Scientific literacy, I think, science for us, science journalism becomes very important, especially now science and health journalism becomes very important. Nowadays, we have realized with COVID-19 that our journalists have now pretty much turned into press release journalists where you just publish a press release without really critically engaging with it. In terms of the numbers, what do the numbers tell us? What are the scientific claims that are backing certain kinds of non-pharmaceutical interventions, for example? I think there's a very urgent need to make sure that we capacitate our journalists in science and health reporting, especially going forward. And I think that's where scientific literacy becomes very, very key going forward for journalists. ICT, of course, digital data journalism skills are very important. Social media management skills, podcasting skills, and all these other skills are very, very much important in terms of foundational literacies that ordinary journalists should be able to possess. Financial literacy, as I've already pointed out, financial journalism, economic journalism becomes very important. Cultural and civic literacy, of course, I think this report actually talks about democracy and human rights, which are very important things that should be foregrounded in terms of training journalists. Let me just move on to this one so that let me move to the next. I think we can always talk about this maybe through a Q&A session if possible.
Yes, that would be great, I think, because we're having already a lot of comments in the chat room. But yeah, that's the 6 C's of education for the future.
Yes. This is very important for us. So again, what also becomes very important when we are talking about journalism training and education for the future is that, as I've already pointed out, critical thinking is very, very important. It is a very, very important aspect that we cannot allow ourselves to ignore in our training aspects. And that's why sometimes students sometimes criticize us for bringing up courses like media theory, media research and all that. But we do that on purpose because we know what it can actually be able to do to a journalist, how it can actually transform somebody's thinking capacity and allow somebody to be able to be a critical thinker based on their ability to link facts and concepts and also to abstract concepts from whatever situation that they find. So when we talk about the 6 C's of education, pretty much it's about thinking, critical thinking, connectivity, creativity skills. Of course, issues around media entrepreneurship becomes very important here. How do you train your journalists so that they not only think about only getting employed, but also make their own content that can actually be sold or packaged and actually circulated in various platforms, but also embracing culture, intercultural journalism. It's very important. Being able to understand that we are global citizens, we work with others, we live with different other cultures, it becomes very important. And then working collaboratively, so team building becomes very important, especially for teams that you can actually constitute for investigative journalism. So you can actually constitute teams that can work on an investigative piece, and there you foster investigative journalism. So those are some of the ways that we use actually to train journalists to work in teams or to work collaboratively and also to communicate effectively. So effective communication also becomes very, very important going forward. Thank you. So let me just move.
Can I bring you to your punchline here?
Yes.
There it is. Revisiting the tribe, because I think that is what you think is the answer to how we can actually embrace the 6 C's and how to strengthen those skills in journalism students. So what are we going to do about this?
All right, thanks so much for bringing me to this slide. So when I say revisiting the triad, what we have often seen is that we have three models of training institutions or journalism training institutions generally across the world. One, which tends to be practice-oriented journalism, which focuses on what we call practice-oriented journalism. Here we are talking about polytechnics, technicons, and the idea there is pretty much to focus more on skills development or what we call crafty competencies. And then, of course, now we're also seeing on-job training programs. Short courses are also part and parcel of this practice-oriented journalism training. But while this is also very good, the problem is that oftentimes it ignores skills like critical thinking that we're talking about. It ignores that. And therefore, it assumes that if somebody is craft competent, somebody is able to write a very good copy, edit a very good media product, then they are good journalists. But the critical thinking skills are not part and parcel of that menu. That's the unfortunate problem with that. And then we have got what we also call the theory-oriented journalism training and education. Here we are talking about traditional universities. Traditional universities which often offer media studies courses. They often just focus on the critical thinking and pretty much sometimes creativity, if ever. And the issue there is that you will forget about the practical side of journalism. That's the unfortunate part of that kind of an approach, which makes it also very difficult for journalists who come out of this to actually be able to fit into newsrooms that require somebody to have the critical thinking and also the practical skills. And then what I'm offering now and I'm proposing, which I think we as the University of Namibia University of Science and Technology, we are doing, of course, we may not be doing it perfectly well, is an integrated approach where theory and practice actually meets or mix together. And there, when you have the two, it allows the student to have the critical thinking skills, but also have the practical skills. And again, on top of that, you also make sure that the students also go on an internship or what we call work integrated learning. And that allows students actually to be able to have a multifaceted graduate attributes that can actually allow them to fit into any world of work, no matter how the changes actually affect that particular setup. That's what I would say for now in terms of.
Thank you so much, Admire. The whole presentation, and it is a very detailed presentation, will be available as well. It's already uploaded on the Google Drive folder, which amazingly Google Drive works currently at least in Namibia and in Germany again, because Google has a little bit of failures on Google Docs, etc. these days. Will be available there, so everyone can read up on it, and it has the arguments are laid out quite nicely there. But I would really love to do two things before we wrap up the session. I'm a little bit afraid that the timekeeper is going to kick us out any moment now. But a short Q&A and then give a glimpse into the toolkit that you can then, everybody can then use to actually do their own needs assessment. So I'll stop sharing here. And if you have a question, please raise your hand. And I see no raised hands. That can't be. The chat was on fire with comments. There's Susgo. Please ask your question.
Thank you so much. It was a very good presentation, but rushed through. My question is, as a university, I'm asking Dr. Maya this question. Do you have a deliberate linkage with those in the industry? For example, you invite somebody who is already in the industry to provide that practical kind of session, or you do it alone as a university? Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot for the questions. Certainly, we do have what we call invited guest series, where we invite our people from the industry to come through and capacitate our journalists. So obviously, as I said, that even though we adopt what we call an integrated approach, of course, sometimes even within that what we call integrated approach, sometimes you get to a situation where sometimes some of your staff, or maybe more than 50% of your staff, are more theory driven, and sometimes you've got 40% that are practice driven. So that also creates a situation where there's also already a mismatch. But if you have got a situation where you've got 50% theory, those who are theory driven, and also 50% that are also that actually allows the situation where you can actually do you can actually come up with a well-rounded graduate. But certainly we do invite various people from industry to come and share with our students, so that they can actually learn more from those that are actually practicing the profession.
Any more questions? Let me check the chat. There is none. Emmanuel, you're raising your hand in the camera. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. I just want to find out from Admire.
Oh, there's two Emmanuels. Sorry.
Oh. So no, both Emmanuels raise their hands.
Yeah, I think so. Let's go with Emmanuel Kondo first, and then Emmanuel Loya.
Yeah. We know that traditionally, journalists, those who go for journalistic courses, tend to be maths phobic or statistics phobic or something like that. Is there any possibility of coming up with a tailor-made statistical courses, maths courses, science courses for journalists? Is there any possibility like that, or do we have to live with that, or that situation where the phobia continues among journalists? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for that question. What happens, that's why I was saying that for us as a former polytechnic, I think we have got a very interesting dynamic here going on, because one of the key, or what we actually call one of the basic requirements for anybody who passes through our university is that they have to do what we call institutional core courses. And these institutional core courses have what we call, one is to pass basic math, they have to pass basic science, they also have to do other, sociological related courses. They also have to do human rights and what we also call contemporary issues courses. So all these courses are tailor-made for everyone, whether you're doing engineering or doing journalism, you have to pass them. If you don't pass them, we call these gatekeeping courses. You will not be able to be given a certificate, or you are not going to be able to pass that qualification. So we already have that within the system, that all our students are going to pass, or to at least know the basic mathematics as they pass through our system.
Okay. Emmanuel, and then a last intervention from Susgo before we get and Anderson is also raising his hand, but please keep it short, because I'm sure Simon, who's I think the timekeeper today, is already there to kick us out of this discussion, which we can obviously continue. And I'm sure the next session will also look into what can we actually do around those problems. Okay, so Emmanuel Loya, please.
Oh, thanks, Peter. I just want to appreciate the presentation by Admire. It was quite amazing, and I've learned quite a lot. I've learned quite a lot because he spoke quite well on issues of curriculum review and the 6 C's of the current, the modern journalism. All that stuff really impacts on me as a media trainer to start thinking beyond what we've been presenting to our students, because as you're putting it down, now it's the digital era and we need to be moving on with the technologies, and all that stuff will really help me in the course of presentations and the course of curriculum review as we go forward. So thanks for the presentation, and I would like to have that one in my email because I want to read it and learn quite more as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Then I have Anderson. You need to unmute your Zoom.
Sorry.
There you go.
You can hear me. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes.
Admire, that's a good presentation. Thank you very much. Yes, somebody said it was rushed through. I wanted to share some experience. In the past, I think when I was working with Reuters, they would have mobilized us and take us through specialized training like financial journalism. So at that time, I would pride myself and say, I am the one who is able to cover stock markets, budgets, and so on. But that's when you get some local institutions that mobilize journalists around to train them, they only scratch on the surface. They don't provide the deep-rooted skills training. So I think that's an area that needs to be explored as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson. And then Suzgo has another comment.
Thank you so much. I wanted to find out, they spoke about a departure from traditional journalism. I mean, in their teaching, there's this issue to do with 5 Ws plus 1H, which is quite traditional, where we talk about objectivity. What is your approach to journalism? Do you still talk about objectivity in view of the critical thinking that we've spoken about?
Thank you so much for that. Certainly we do certainly emphasize the 5 Ws and an H. Those are traditional basic skills, obviously, that any journalist has to, but also we make sure that as part of the critical thinking skills that we're building, we also make sure that our journalists are also exposed to what some scholars are calling advocacy journalism, so that they realize that there are certain cases where you cannot use objective journalism just to cover. For example, when you're dealing with social justice issues, you certainly probably would need a frame that is actually maybe focused more on understanding the intersectional issues that actually constitute that particular issue that you're dealing with. So yes, we focus more on the 5 to expose our students to other forms of journalism that also are a departure from the traditional ways of actually looking at journalism from an objective point of view.
Thank you so much, Admire. We'll continue the discussion how to improve this relationship. But for this session, I want to bring it back to Zoé Titus now. And I'll share my screen again. And my question to Zoe is, so after that experience from the needs assessment, do you feel that the needs assessment brought you additional information how to tackle these questions that were discussed now with Admire? Like, what is it that media managers need you to train journalists on? Do you think you got information out of that that helped you in designing your training portfolio?
Hi, Peter. Yes, definitely. There is a word that Admire used a couple of times during his presentation, and that's collaboration. And I think Alan Finlay last week, and then also Professor Wasserman, there is a consistency in their responses that we must not look at training as a linear issue. It's either a tertiary institution or it's let's say a college, or these training modules, formats complement each other. So I think what we have learned is that, for example, the NAS courses, or that the NXT Journalism Hub can provide a lot of that practical training and consistent skills development that a university institution can't provide. In terms of what we do, we can be a lot more flexible. So that's our takeaway from this, and as I said, as collaborative and complementary at the same time.
Thank you. So we are now wrapping up this session with the launch of the needs assessment that you can do. So there is a Google Drive folder. It's not completely finished yet, but it will be available by end of January, Zoe?
That's correct, Peter.
Yeah. So in that Google Drive folder, you'll have a manual for the needs assessment that gives you an understanding how the different pieces work together. There's also the guidelines for focus group discussions that will be in there, and the template for, we used Google Forms to produce a template that you can use to actually do the training needs assessment yourself. So the survey that we developed together with Christy Cole and Herman Wasserman is in there. You can adjust it to your needs. For example, in our template, there's the Namibian languages that show up there as options. But obviously, if you do this in Malawi, or you do it in Lesotho, or you do it in Eswatini or in Botswana, you can replace those so the form is editable and adjust it to your needs. And this will be available by end of January, so that you can then start the new year with looking into the needs assessment. And we would be really looking forward for you to then also afterwards share what you've learned in those exercises. And the idea, obviously, here again, as well in Namibia, the idea is that the next Journalism Hub will continue to do this kind of engagement and needs assessment continuously.
Just one final comment. If you do decide to use this resource, which is freely available, and I think it's a very valuable resource, please let us know and please share the findings. It would be of immense value to us to know what your findings are, and so that we can do a comparative analysis and have a greater understanding of what is happening in the region.
Thank you so much, Zoe. And I'm handing it back to DJ Marcus.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Admire, and Zoe, and Peter, and all the people who joined the discussion. Really good session, really good insights. And I especially loved the 16 skills, and I was wondering how many skills of these I do have. At least I have one skill, and this is pressing the play button. We will break now and be back at 10:40, okay?
Amabaqhwasa.